Spoštovane in spoštovani, lepo pozdravljeni in dobrodošli v mojem podkastu Moč besede. Tokrat vam predstavljam eno zelo posebno gostjo. Z mano je gospa Sunita Williams, v Ameriki jo kličejo Suniti Williams, v Indiji Sunita, v Sloveniji tudi Sunita, mnogi jo poznajo pod imenom Sani. Je upokojena ameriška astronavtka indijsko-slovenskega rodu, ki svojo karierno potjo in dosežki dokazuje, kaj lahko ženska doseže z vrhunskim znanjem, urjenjem in predvsem vztrajnostjo. Le redki posamezniki se lahko pohvalijo z izkušnjo življenja v vesolju. Gospa Williams jo ima, saj je med drugim sodelovala v kar 3 vesoljskih odpravah. V vesolju je skupaj preživela 608 dni in izvedla več sprehodov v vesolju v skupnem trajanju več kot 62 ur in še 6 minut zraven, ki je za večino od nas seveda nepredstavljiva avantura. Gospa Sunita Williams, izjemno ponosna sem, da vas lahko pozdravim tukaj v mojem podkastu. Najlepša hvala, ker ste si vzeli čas za poslušalce in gledalce podkasta Moč besede. Pogovor bom zdaj seveda nadaljevala v angleškem jeziku, zato samo na kratko povzamem uvod, da ga bo razumela tudi moja gostja. Today, of course, I will continue in English now. Today I have the honor of introducing a very special guest. With me is Mrs. Suniti Williams, a retired American astronaut of Indian and Slovenian descent. Her career and achievements show just how much a woman can accomplish through knowledge, training, and perseverance. Very few people in the world can say they've lived in space. Mr. Williams can. She's taken part in 3 space missions and has logged 608 days in space. She has completed 62 hours and 6 minutes of total spacewalk time over the course of her career, the most of any female astronaut and 4th of NASA's all-time list. For most of us, that's almost beyond imagination. But Mrs. Williams, it's really a privilege to welcome you here at this podcast. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to speak with the listeners and viewers of the podcast called The Power of the Word. So let me begin with your roots. Everybody knows that your roots are here in Slovenia. Your great-grandmother, Marija Bohinc, came from Leše near Tržič. How do you feel when you visit Slovenia? Are those, special days when you come here, knowing that your roots are from, I have to say, beautiful Slovenia? So what's your impression of our country?
Well, Lepa, for inviting me here to the podcast. And yes, it's exciting. Every single time I have come to Slovenia, it's a handful of times that I've been here. It's exciting every single time. I feel like even though it's a small country, I learn something new each time that I've visited. And knowing that my own roots began here from my mother's side, that's pretty spectacular. And the Tržič is just a wonderful place. Leše is a wonderful place, and the people there, it feels like family every single time I visit.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. But has Slovenian culture influenced you in any way?
Oh, absolutely. My mother has always been a strong influence in our family. I think she's sort of the one who holds everything together all the time. Still, even now at an older age that I am, I still call her up to say, hey, what's the phone number for so-and-so? Or how do I get in touch with so-and-so? She's been the admin as well as the glue, as the structure for our whole family, and has held everything together. I think she's pretty brave. She's pretty tough. She's very generous. And I think these are all characteristics of people from Slovenia.
Thank you. But do you perhaps keep any customs or traditions at home in America that passed down through your family?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know how to make pizza?
I don't know how to make pizza. My
cousins
do, and my grandmother, of course, made it all the time. My mother makes strudel, and so yes, now that I have a little more free time, I think this is something that I must learn how to do. And my cousin welcomed me to come over to her house when she's making it with her daughters.
You said you have more time. You retired, but you didn't retire. Yeah, you still work, and you will work as long as you can. I can see that in your eyes.
Well, there's a lot to share. So my story is worth sharing, and I like to be able to perpetuate some of the lessons learned that I am lucky enough to have experienced and pass that on to the next generation of explorers. So, but I have retired officially from my job, which allows me to sort of pick and choose in the time frames that I want to work. So I will make time for learning how to make the petitza for sure.
Good.
And traditions wise, every Easter, it's Slovenian sausages and petitza for a long period of time, and so we're keeping that up for sure. Of course, we used to always go over to my grandmother's house when she was alive during the holidays, and have always had Slovenian food. And my father was sort of subjected to it, but he put up with it okay, and I think we're all better for it.
Mrs. Williams, your career has always been connected to science and engineering. You served in the U.S. Navy, became a helicopter pilot, then a test pilot, and later a safety officer on the USS Sapien. At that time, very few women were in those roles, and even today, that hasn't changed much. I mean, sorry, I have to ask you some, gender equality questions. How did you face the challenge of proving yourself in a predominantly male environment? I mean, was it difficult for you, or you were just so good that, doesn't matter?
No, I think there's always moments of doubt in whatever your career is, at least for me. I think a lot of probably women have this potentially more so than men, or at least it seems that way. So there's always those times. But, I think I just liked what I was doing, first and foremost. I think you have to find your passion, the field that you love. I love flying helicopters. I loved being a test pilot. I really loved being on the ship doing what we call a disassociated tour, where you're learning what the Navy does and driving a ship. And honestly, I had to tell myself a couple times, like, the helicopter doesn't know, the spacecraft doesn't know, the spacesuit doesn't know if you're a man or a woman. So you can do those jobs, right? You can do those jobs as well as any man can do those jobs. So, I mean, you have to have those internal conversations of that fortitude, and then, be the best that you can be confident when you're competent at the job that you're doing.
Can I tell you a secret? I watched the first Top Gun movie 16 times. 16 times. That's the only movie I watched more than once. Oh my! Because I really, really love aircrafts. I used to be a stewardess, and I was competing with the pilots to recognize the airplane in the air while approaching. Yes, I was really good at that. So, but why aircrafts? Why helicopters? I mean, what was that your child's dream to be a pilot? When you ask young girls or young boys, what do you want to be in the future? Oh, I want to be a pilot. Was that your dream?
No, not at all. And I actually, now as an older person, I question whether or not as a young child you actually really even know. It's great to have dreams and ambitions, but you need to go out and try different things. I wanted to be a veterinarian. My family's always loved animals, and my father was a doctor, so it seemed like it was a comfortable thing to do. I actually felt like I didn't get into the universities that I needed to go pursue that career. And my brother recommended joining the military. And so as a big brother suggestion, I applied to the Naval Academy and I got in. And then I think the Slovenian stubbornness happened, and I was, like, okay, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to see this through. And then Top Gun came out. Yeah. And then I became a pilot after that. And I think, just going back to my initial statement, I never knew what the door would open. But you have to get out there and try different things. Some things you're going to be successful at, some things you're not going to be successful at. But find your passion, and then you will definitely be successful.
Okay, we mentioned Top Gun. Can I ask you one more, like, not really very funny question, but the interesting one? Do you watch science fiction movies? I mean, you were in space. Are there any similarities in real space life and science fiction movies?
Probably. I'm not a big science fiction watcher. I have seen some science fiction movies. I was a Star Trek person when I was a youngster. So I like that, but it always seemed like it was so unachievable, so it's not tangible. Like, why, right? So I actually like movies that have more of the personality about the characters, like The Martian, I thought was a great movie. It really, sort of dove into what it's like as part of a space crew, and then what it's like to be having the thought process of being someplace where you have a little bit of difficulty. Maybe some lessons learned there. So I think I like that a little bit better than sci-fi.
Now, when we are discussing, science fiction movies, which is all about imagination, what's out there in space, but one question I really do have to ask, is there life in space? Do you think that in one planet, I don't know in which galaxy, there are beings who have brains?
I think there has to be, right?
Yeah.
What's the probability? It's being here on Earth, sometimes we have cloudy days, sometimes we have days with a lot of humidity, and you get a little like blurry vision of really what's out in the universe. Being in space above all the atmosphere of the planet, you can look out and there's billions and billions of stars. I mean, it's crazy how many stars are out there. So
I envy you.
when you think about that probability, like every star potentially has planets on it or could have a planet associated with it. And all those planets, if there's billions of stars, there's got to be something that has the right combination.
You've seen planet Earth, from above 4 times, yeah?
3 times.
3 times, and the last one was 3 times. Do you see a difference like 20 years ago and today, especially regarding the climate change, which is, a hot topic nowadays, and it has to be?
Yeah, I think in the last 20 years, definitely there has been some changes. Sometimes you doubt yourself again a little bit about, like, is it seasonal or what am I seeing? Is it up there for like 6 months at a time? But since the shuttle time frame, at least, we've been taking some pretty good pictures of our planet throughout this time frame, and there's definitely some changes. I saw more algae blooms in the ocean this time around. Particularly in the Andes, I've been up in space at the same seasons a couple times, and I've seen some changes in the glacier activity there for sure. So I do think that things are happening. A lot of hurricanes while we were up in space, that we could see them coming across the Atlantic, and some of them now actually veering off toward the east. I think coming over toward Europe, which I think is just fairly new phenomena.
Yeah.
So yes, things are changing in the ocean and the climate. It's all alive. It's all happening. Things are moving, and you can't help but, if things are heating up, that's going to make some changes.
Do you think we are taking care enough of our planet? The only one that we have. There is no planet B, not that we know of.
Exactly. I think we need to all be a little more conscientious of what activity, what we're doing to it, what human impact has on our planet. People say, I'm worried for the planet. Well, in all honesty, I think I'm more worried for the human's existence on the planet. I think the planet will survive. It can change, but it always finds a balance, right? And that balance might not include humans if we're not careful.
Quite scary. But in 2006, you began working with the Russian Space Agency on the International Space Station's program. How did your time in space affect you? Do you see things differently since you've become an astronaut?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, looking at the planet, right, and having that opportunity to look at it from that perspective, which a lot of times you see a lot of ocean. 71% of the planet is ocean, right? And so it affects us. So we have to be conscientious about the ocean. But you look at the land masses and how few that is, only 29%. And, it makes you think about the people there. And like every person I know is on that planet. Every animal, every plant that I know is right here.
Hey, we nearly all of us.
Yeah. And we all need to take care of it. And it seems almost weird that somebody would not get along on this planet. We only have one place to live, like you said. It's pretty special.
Did you change any of your daily habits after, the experience?
Well, I try to. It's hard here on Earth to change your habits. Up in space, it's a little bit easier because you are away from a lot of distractions. Here on Earth, I think there's a lot of distractions, but I think I'm more organized, for one thing, because in space, everything's floating all over the place. So you have a place for everything, and everything has a place is sort of the motto, right? And so...
Is that challenging?
Yeah, it is challenging.
You really, really precise on everything and be totally organized.
It's hard. It's a
That's not in its nature, yeah?
Yeah, it's an adjustment. You can't just put something down on the table. It's not going to stay there. It's going to float away. So one of the most frustrating things is losing things in space. So I think I carried that over a little bit too while I'm back at home for sure. But it was one of the things that I noticed on this last flight in particular was being able to really focus on a task and focus on a moment in time and not really get distracted with worrying about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen in the future. Just really concentrating. And I found that I was able to write more eloquently, more clearly when I had that opportunity up there. So I'm trying to imitate it back here on Earth, but it's darn hard. So many
It's like when you come from space, it's back to reality.
Yeah, sort of.
And I often wonder, Madame Williams, what is it like looking out from a space shuttle during launching procedure? I mean, that's a lot of pressure to your body, and then moving from the Earth to the space, and Earth is becoming just a little ball you see. Those are probably special moments.
Well, I think, the first time is always the most memorable, the one that sticks with you the most. And I launched on a space shuttle on my first flight, the second, and I was on the mid-deck, which meant I didn't have any major activities during launch. On the Soyuz, I was the left seater, so I had some responsibilities. And of course, I was a pilot on Starliner, so I had some responsibilities. When you have responsibilities, you're concentrating on those in particular. Yeah. But on back to my first flight, when I was on the mid-deck, I didn't even think it was going to happen. I think most astronauts don't think it's going to happen, because how do you actually really imitate that launch? You can't. You can imitate getting in, you can imitate what potentially the displays will say, but the whole action of a rocket launching is something unique. And until you do it once, I think you don't really know what to expect, and you don't believe it's going to happen. So we were on the mid deck. It was me, Christer Fuglesang from Sweden, and Joni Higginbottom, and we are all rookies, first time flyers. And all of a sudden, the countdown continues when past 10, 9, all the way down to 1. And in the meantime, the main engines on the shuttle light, then the solid boosters light. You can feel the vibrations, and then you're just propelled off the planet. And all three of us it was like the best roller coaster ride ever. We were hooting and hollering. And the guys on the flight deck who were at the controls were like, "Would you please be quiet down there?" Because we were so excited. We were going. I mean, we didn't think we were going to go. And we launched. It was amazing. And you can feel the acceleration. You are told about it. You sort of understand it potentially from a centrifuge. So you get the idea of what's going to happen, but until you really feel it, the G-force, like an elephant sitting on your chest and like squishing you for a couple 30 seconds or so. And then the relief after that. And then the main engines shut down, and then everything is super quiet, and everything starts to float.
And then you see the planetary.
And then you can go around it by the window.
It's not flat. Yeah.
And you see the planet, and it's round.
Yeah, it's round. For sure, yeah.
Yes, my teachers were right.
I have to believe you. But could you tell us a little bit more about the life in space? I mean, what was your biggest challenge? There are probably many challenges, but what was the biggest one? Is it gravity? Is it special food? Is practicing because you have to maintain the strength in your muscles? What's the biggest challenge?
That's an interesting question. The biggest challenge, huh? I guess probably what you said, like working out, is knowing that you have to work out every single day, because every single moment that you're not working out, your body is smart enough to know, like, I don't need all this bone structure. I don't need all this muscle structure to hold me up. And so all the time it's leaching your bone density and your muscle mass. And so knowing that every single day without a break, maybe during a spacewalk day, that's the only time you have to get up and you have to get on the exercise equipment. I personally like working out. So at first it was fun, like I love this and stuff like that. But then after like 5 months, 6 months, the routine of that gets a little bit old. We have great people on ground in Houston, Texas, who help us with our workouts, and they notice it too. They know, so they try to mix up and change a little bit here and there.
And you never had to say, Houston, we have a problem.
There were a couple times. I think, on that note, some of the most stressful things are doing maintenance on the exercise equipment, because the rest of the crew, you and the rest of the crew all have to use it. So whenever you're doing that type of thing, you don't want to mess it up. I think that's also one of the biggest worries is there's not a Home Depot or a convenience store nearby. So if you break something, you're going to have to figure out how to fix it.
Is the most challenging the spacewalk? I mean, is it cold or is it hot when you go outside? What's the temperature? It depends whether there is a day or night, but is it hard?
Yeah, it's both hot and cold. And I think spacewalks are a pretty unique experience. It's pretty much, I think, the gamut of human emotions. You are hot, you are cold, depending on if the sun is shining on you. You are uncomfortable because the suit's not very comfortable. There are times when you're hungry because...
How heavy is the suit? I mean, okay, it's great.
Yeah, it's about 300 and 350 pounds when you start adding tools to it.
That's 170 kilos.
You don't have to feel that weight, but you feel the bulk of it, and you have to learn how to move in it. So it's not easy. And so you have to keep your strength up to be able to do that. And then your stamina for the long period that you're out there. And a little bit going back to the emotions, like you're really happy because something worked out a lot easier in space than it did in the pool where we trade. Or then something is much more difficult all of a sudden, maybe because of temperature changes on the equipment, on an electrical connection or something. And then all of a sudden you're hungry because you're out there for a long time, and then you have to pee. Sure, because all of these feelings and all these emotions going through your head as you're trying to do the tasks while you're out there. And then in the back of your mind is your partner. Of course,
yeah,
you
always two,
and you're the lifeboat for the other person in case something happens to their suit or anything happens to them. We train that we would bring that other person in. So in the back of your head, you're always thinking, "Where is my partner? Where's my partner? Where's my partner?" In case I have to go get them and put the stuff down that I have.
Previously, when we had a discussion about robotics in space, and you said to me that probably in the future, the robots will make a spacewalk. But then I said, and I think that you agreed, the astronauts are not going to be really very pleased if the robots are going to do that. That means that the spacewalk is like the highlight of the astronaut's life. Am I correct?
Well, spacewalks are awesome. It's great. Yeah. We train a lot for them, and that opportunity to be out there, and the only thing between you and the universe is this visor that you have is pretty spectacular. You can turn your head in any direction. You can see everything. And to feel the sun, to literally feel the sun on your back is just amazing. Everybody, I hope, would get to have that experience at some point in time. It is dangerous, though. So if there are potentially repetitive tasks that one day we could have a robot do, I think that would be a safer stance. In particular, when we go back to the moon, and are there sustainably, if there's some repetitive things, rather than have somebody use a spacesuit and risk their lives in that suit, then we can have maybe robots do some of that action. And I'm retired, so I'm not in.
But you did it. You had the privilege time already. You did the 62 hours of.
Yeah, only a little bit.
But here on Earth, Madame Williams, our times are sadly marked by divisions. As a politician, I often see this, and conflicts, even wars nowadays. It often seems as if the international community cannot find a common language. That's, sad in a way. Yet the crews of the International Space Station came from many different nations. What is that space community like?
I think it is...
does it matter from which country?
It doesn't. It doesn't. We're human beings, and we're doing something bigger than ourselves. In this... Organizations are a brotherhood, a sisterhood. You go to any of the places where we train to go to space, the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, Canada, and even more countries who are now joining in, who are part of those agencies, and some in the Middle East. It's wonderful how everybody is thinking about goals that are bigger than themselves, and how can we help ourselves back here on this planet and this planet ourselves, as well as doing the exploration and the science, engineering, technology, shared vision of this exploration is something that I think just binds us as human beings, not necessarily people from specific countries. And yes, it is good to have a lead in in the goal so that people stay focused, and then we can open up the conversation and debate, how we're going to get there, what we're going to do. But the whole process is a learning experience, and it's a growth experience, and it's exploration in the making. And I think that's well worth it.
Let's go back to Earth. When you come back from a space mission, of course, you have to adjust to gravity again and on other, physical changes. How does the space affect your body? I mean, not just mentally, but physically. Is it hard to return? Is there a long period to adapt to gravity again? How does it look like when you come back?
Yeah, for me, it was in stages, and I think most everybody is like this as well. Different parts of your body get affected by microgravity, some a little bit more, some a little bit less. The initial first impression, big impression, is your neurovestibular system. So essentially your balance, and with that occurs nausea or feeling not so good, right? If you don't have a good balance. And remember, your inner ear is not subjected to gravity for a period of time when you're in space. You get used to that while you're up there, so you come back and all of a sudden gravity is a major player on your balance. And I, for instance, felt pretty sick for about 24 hours, just nauseous, just like turn my head and feel like I was going to fall over. So that's sort of the neurovestibular side, but it goes away. Your brain, and particularly if you're healthy, your brain and your body remember, and they go, okay, I remember. Let's come back to gravity again. We understand it. And then the second part was, I was mentioning that we work out up in space, and we work out all the big muscles that help us maintain that we can stand up, and our bone density is good. But all those little muscles, the ones that allow you to balance, so the little muscles in your neck that you don't use while you're up there. You don't have to hold your head up while you're up in space. We don't even realize that we do that here on Earth. And so all those little muscles have to get reenacted and start working again. For me, that manifests itself as being sort of tired for about a month or so until all that came back again. And then some of your agility, the ability to walk, stand on one leg, or, walk with your eyes closed. All of that has to sort of get reacclimatized, and that's about a month. And then finally, for me, the last thing is this fast twitch muscles, getting your brain connected to your muscles so you can run fast. And that's still, I'm still in the process. I'm working on it.
Oh, you look okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I feel okay. I look okay. I look normal.
My final question, based on your professional and, of course, life experience, what would be, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are asking you this question, but, for my viewers, I would like to ask it as well. What would your advice be to young people, especially, if I can say, young women?
Yes.
Because you said you never dreamt about being an astronaut, but you became an astronaut. You were persistent. You studied a lot. And if not you, I mean, who could be the right person to tell young people just a little advice to Slovenia?
Absolutely. I would say the big thing is don't be afraid of challenges. Sometimes, I don't feel like my life was direct from, a child to becoming an astronaut. I feel like there was a lot of turns. Some of them felt like failures, but they opened new doors and new opportunities. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I joined the military. I didn't know about flying airplanes. I wanted to fly jets. I actually flew helicopters, which made
me fly jets?
Of course.
Everybody wants to.
Everyone wants to fly jets. But being a helicopter pilot made me think more about how does this work?
Yeah.
Right. And so that
without wings,
that got me into test pilot school, which opened the door to being an astronaut. So life is going to be full of potential disappointments or challenges. And I think look them in the eye and, see what other opportunities that's going to allow you to have.
Madame Williams, I really appreciate you took time to talk to me. I had a wonderful time with you. We had an opportunity to have a discussion for an hour and a half before podcast. I am really, really honored and happy that you do visit Slovenia from time to time. And as you noticed, you are more than welcome here anytime. So thank you a lot for the wise words. Thank you for sharing the knowledge among the people, not just in Slovenia, but around the globe. Now you're going to have more time because you're retired.
Yes.
Please continue to do so. Really, thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome to Slovenia as many times as you want to come. You will always be welcomed.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I'll be back.
Hasta la vista. I'll be back. Spoštovane poslušalke, poslušalci, gledalke in gledalci, vam pa seveda najlepša hvala, ker ste prisluhnili tej izjemni gospe Suniti Williams. Do naslednjič. Nasvidenje.